Hello, everybody. So, I promised all y'all that the channel was going to make a kind of shift, so to speak. We're going to try to get away from just cramming trip reports down your throat. I know they're super cool. Don't get me wrong. The trip reports, that's the reason why I started this channel in the first place. But to me, it doesn't mean anything just telling you all these anecdotal stories unless I start applying them in real life. Okay? And I know I do my unpacking episodes is what I call them, but I'm really just talking to myself and agreeing with myself about my own interpretations and takeaways of what happened. That it has its place and it's worth doing, but it's a whole other ball game when you take your takeaways and bounce them off of another sentient human being, right? Hear their interpretation based on their life experience. It's a completely different ballgame. And that's what we're doing today. My boy Hugo, I'm going to totally butcher your last name, sir. You've pronounced it to me before, but I've since forgotten. Hugo Vrsalovic. This name, okay? He is the founder of the Recovery Freedom Circle. He is also the host of the 1% in Recovery podcast. I met Hugo at a Houston podcast convention, and it was kindred spirits. I mean, a fellow recovering addict and someone else who's both spiritual and religious. Yes, those are actually two different things, by the way. Sorry, not completely different. There are overlaps, but anyways, blah, blah, blah. So we naturally had a lot to talk about, and our conversations would last like an hour or so kind of thing. And we eventually were like, why don't we just turn on a microphone and record these conversations? And that's exactly what we did. Hugo is going to be the first in a long line of already recorded interviews that I'm going to release. This is not part of the through line story of the last episode I released was trip number 15, the trip that broke me. This is not a continuation of that story, okay? I'm going to release another episode coming up that's going to be part 2 of that, like the unbelievable integration that happened after that experience. We're going to have that video, trust me. And then we're going to have the takeaways, plural, from the unpacking of that experience, which, y'all, is going to be even more intense and epic than the actual experience itself. But regardless, what I'm saying is this is a just random non sequitur, if you will, but is going to represent the future of this channel. More interactive, talking, bouncing ideas off of other people and the like. And so here we go. I sat down with my boy Hugo, and we talked addiction, recovery, God, psychedelics. Of course, he was very interested in that, and this conversation is absolutely amazing. Great, awesome guy. Y'all go follow him. Support the Recovery Freedom Circle. And, subscribe to his channel. And by all means, if you are an addict, let me just tell you, I love you, and there's nothing wrong with you. Okay. Just real quick, I'm not cured, even having done ayahuasca 7 times. Okay. I'm not going to try to compare apples to oranges per se, but sex addiction is a completely different beast, in my opinion, than just about any other addiction. Okay, 3.5 billion years of hardwired programming, the number one desire in life, y'all, the number one driving force is sex. Okay, pretty hard to abstain. Okay. So y'all, all I'm trying to tell you here is if you're an addict and you're suffering and you're struggling and you've tried everything and you want to kill yourself, okay, I love you, and you're not the problem. You are not the problem. And I love you. I just want to say that again. Listen to this episode, follow my boy Hugo, and let's all help each other heal. Here we go. We are recording.
Psychedelics. What a topic. How does that play into recovery? Welcome again to another episode of the 1% in Recovery podcast, where we encourage you to laugh every day. It is the music of the soul. We encourage you to work hard. And when I say work hard, that means work hard in recovery, work hard in your relationships, work hard in your job, business, career, and to love unconditionally. That's always a tricky one, but we've got to learn how to just love and just realize love's going to come back in all kinds of forms. So your EQ is your IQ. You cannot outthink an emotional issue, and recovery is beautiful. The thing to do now is to tap in, join the Facebook group. The link is down below, the Recovery Freedom Circle. So this is where a community where you can actually post something, record something. So it's not just about me or my guests talking on the podcast. We're also intertwining how everyone else can share their visions of recovery and self-awareness. Today, we have the pleasure of talking with Andrew. How are you doing, Andrew?
I am. That's all I can say is I'm happy. Ups and downs, but you know what? The ups are more than the downs, and it's trending upwards. So overall, I'm doing good.
All right, Andrew's going to talk to us about psychedelics, ayahuasca, mushrooms, addiction, recovery, God, all these wonderful topics that we love to kind of delve into. So Andrew, like we always do with our guests, start off telling the audience one thing you love.
Yes. So I hate to get so hippy-dippy up at the front of the episode here. I'm going to quote my wife. My wife once said that she loves love, and it was one of the most beautifully innocent, amazing things I've ever heard, and I've come to embody that because there's a source to anything that you love, and we have love calling from the inside of us, which is what I think addiction is in the first place, is that your love that's calling out gets confused and perverted and defiled and transformed into something that it's not. So I always have to dive back in and remember that everything comes from a place of love, more or less, specifically addiction, in my opinion. So God knows that, and love is love, and I love love. There you go.
There you go. So let's just jump into question one. You brought it up. We're going to be taught. You've dealt with addiction, just like I. You've done therapy. You've done rooms. You've also now delved into psychedelics.
Yes.
Specifically ayahuasca mushrooms.
Yep.
Tell the audience how psychedelics play into, especially when we're dealing with either a traumatic event, childhood, explaining spirituality, God. Tell us something about how these trips have helped you understand addiction and recovery.
Whew. So let me first tell you that I have, what is it? What is the count now? 78? It's almost, I think it might be in the 80s now. 80 or so episodes describing this, right? So my answer would be to point everyone to my podcast and say, listen to every episode. It's such a incredibly dense and deep question to even pose. But the answer is, if I had to boil this down to to bullet point kind of elevator pitch kind of thing, what psychedelics did for me in my addiction, first of all, again, it was love that woke me up, that said, I need a change, right? My wife is categorically across the board the best person I've ever met in my entire life. And when I met her, I was like, I'm not going to screw this one up. I need a change.
It usually happens with a lot of men.
Yeah.
They meet the right woman, and it's amazing.
Absolutely. And so I was like, this is serious. I've done all of the therapies, this, and all of the SSRI medications, that. I mean, the cocktail, Zoloft, Wellbutrin, Paxil, Effexor, Prozac, all that stuff. Didn't work. It just made me numb. It's like putting a Band-Aid over cancer.
Well, explain that for a second. When you say numb in terms of that, it really wasn't allowing you, it wasn't giving you that extra ability to feel more?
Precisely. I'll never forget. So I'm a very emotional guy. I was a rough and tumble dude, but I'll watch a movie and I'll tear up. I love movies and I get emotional when I watch them. And I'll never forget when I was in college, I was watching a movie that I'd seen before that always gets me to tear up. I don't remember which one it was, but I was watching this movie and I was just dead. I was watching these characters going through this incredible strife and dramatic things, and I felt absolutely nothing for them. And that was an indication that, again, it's like slapping a Band-Aid over cancer. So what psychedelics did for me is, here's, and this is going to probably turn a lot of people off right on the onset here. What I'm about to say, people don't, like anyone listening, don't hit the ejection lever just yet, right? Listen, this is going to kind of, you may want to walk out when you hear this, because I will say that psychedelics did not cure my addiction. They didn't. God did. And here's the thing though, God didn't even cure my addiction. I'm still an addict sitting here right now. I still slip up. Now, I wouldn't say very often, but often enough to where I look at myself like, Andrew, what in the hell are you doing? Like, why did you do that? You've talked to God and you've had all these amazing experiences and you know better. I think a lot of addicts go through that, and I'm no different.
But that should be normal.
Yes.
Relapses should not be anything good or bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's great that if someone doesn't, and it really also, I think it depends on the addiction. And I think that's where people get it wrong. They associate, because everything started with alcohol, they associate every addiction, how you can treat alcohol. But now we have more and more behavioral addictions. They're not just substance addictions.
Yep. So just to let everyone in on what my addiction is, sex addiction, porn, self-stimulation, et cetera. So I personally find this to be, I'm not an addict I haven't been an addict really to anything else, maybe a little bit of binge drinking in college kind of thing. But I, for one, find...
a lot of people did binge drinking in college. That's nothing out of the ordinary.
Exactly. And I think this probably overlaps a little bit with like gambling addiction too. But to me, sex addiction is so literally in your face all the time. It's like if you're addicted to heroin, it's relatively easy to avoid syringes, like something that would stimulate your, get your blood flowing, where like, oh man, I gotta, so it's easy to avoid syringes. It's more or less, you don't come across that in day-to-day life that often. But I could walk out right now and just go strolling downtown and see a hot woman and be stimulated.
Well, the world revolves around sex and money.
Exactly.
But we're not supposed to talk about sex, money, or God. But amazingly, these are the topics. Is like, I totally understand that. Even though gambling is not about money, there is an aspect to gambling about money.
Yes.
For gamblers, it's always about, I got to be in action.
Yeah.
Would you say something like, is that something similar with porn or any other type of sex addiction, about maybe feeling in action? I don't know what words maybe pop up or phrases.
Well, so the way I look at it is like this. And I think this is probably the case with all addiction, but to me, for me, this is what I've noticed in myself, is that my cerebral cortex, right, the evolved part of my brain, right, the unemotional part of my brain, the logic part of my brain, it can look at the concept of porn and, spending an entire day wasting your time watching porn and I can group that into a logical kind of like schema in my cerebral cortex, and I can look at that whole concept and say, that's ridiculous. That's a waste. It's an obvious waste of time. You just wasted your whole day when you could have been productive. Stupid. But if my reptilian brain gets even the tiniest spider's silk thread of a steamy memory, little memories of that, if I get the tiniest inkling of a memory, it's like off to the races. And if my cerebral cortex doesn't catch that in time to group it into, that's a ridiculous thing, Andrew, don't waste your time, there's literally nothing that I can do. Nothing. I have tried everything. And that's why psychedelics was the biggest wake up call. And to me, if you, to answer the original question, I'm sorry I wangled a little bit too much.
No, it's good. No, because I've also kind of, I think it's always good to kind of establish certain either words or phrases or thought processes. But continue to talk about the trips and stuff. Yeah.
So if ayahuasca and psychedelics and stuff did anything, what it really did, I mean, that sounded dismissive. What I did, it did a lot. It did so much. So you have I'm going to spend the rest of my life writing and talking about these experiences. It is the most cosmically significant thing. It's the reason I quit a job of a successful career of 15 years in management consulting, making really good money and good benefits. When you have a 2.5 hour conversation with God, who tells you the answers to existence, and those answers of existence have a fractal pattern that go from all the way from the most cosmic all the way down to the most microscopic, and in the process of that entanglement, your life and everyone else's life is wrapped up in that same beautiful fractal pattern, and everything like addiction and stuff is a cascading effect of that. And so with just 4 words, like God could come down on this, and it usually happens like this, by the way. God usually gives you really, what's the word? Is it laconian? Laconic. He gives you very laconic, very Ernest Hemingway-esque answers. You ask him a question, he'll give you 4 words. And those 4 words are usually in a riddle form. But they are the deepest thing, the most life-changing thing you've ever heard in your entire life. I'll give you an example. God was pointing one time on a trip. He was gesturing to my hand, and I had a little blood blister on my hand right here because I was helping my wife with catering the day before. And God kept pointing to this, gesturing to this blood blister, and I kept looking at it, and I was like, oh, whatever, and it doesn't seem important to me, and so I kept looking away, but he was like, look at that, and I was like, okay, and then so I'm looking at this blood blister. And I'll never forget, I dropped my hand again, and I said, is this important? And what God told me, it's going to make me tear up because it's so beautifully profound. He said, our scars are important. And that's 4 words. Our scars are important. And what's so amazing about that is it wasn't the exterior superficial scar, little blood blister on my hand. Underneath that scar is a broken bone from 8th grade. The only time in my life that I bullied somebody ever, and I had regretted that my entire life of bullying this poor kid. I've always been nice and bent over backwards for people, and there was this one time swept up in the testosterone of 8th grade football and trying to prove something to your friends that I bullied a kid, and I punched him, and I broke my hand. And then I started throwing tennis balls at him and stuff like that because I broke my hand. And the whole trip was woven around the concept of bullying. And I'm talking, God broke it down into World War II and the Holocaust of like, I mean, I could go on for hours about this, but there were so many themes on the trip about bullying that were just heartbreakingly beautiful, and it was deeply personal to me. And there was a lot of healing because we all have our scars, and the main point of that whole trip is if you get a scar, because scars are going to happen to you. What you then do with that scar that you have is absolutely critical, not only for you, but for anyone you encounter and for all of humanity.
going back all the way through the annals of history, through the dawn of time, and going forward to the end of time, people get a scar, and then you have a decision. Do I inflict another scar on someone else because I'm angry and spiteful and I want revenge and this, that, and the other? Or do I use my scar as a learning opportunity and instead help and do all the good stuff, right? And so when God said our scars are important, it was the most fractally, again, rolling all the way up to the hypercosmic and rolling down to to like the macro level, us and stuff, and then rolling all the way down to the constituents of matter and space-time itself. Cosmically significant stuff, beautiful stuff. And so what psychedelics does, to answer your original question, is it shows you the path. More accurately, it slams you down on the path. It takes you wherever you are and says, hey, here's the path. Boom! And I'm talking just a cosmic slam your face down. If you have issues that you don't want to bring up, it's going to bring it up. And it's going to bring it up in incredibly brutal ways. I'm talking like, this is going to get too graphic here. I'm sorry, people listening. I'm talking rot your face off, like rotting from the inside out and being ripped down into hell. Every time I've been to hell on my experiences, I get pulled through about 300, 400 yards of rotting human flesh and maggots and skulls and stuff. But that's just skimming the surface of hell. Once you go down into what hell really is, it is something so hyper-cosmically terrifying. Thank God I can't bring anything back to relate it to anything here. Otherwise, I would be traumatized and be in a mental institution. And so when I say that things get brought up, it gets brought up in that kind of fashion where it's like, oh, I'm going to die. Like when people talk about the death experience, like the ego death on psychedelics, it's very easy to paper over that as like, oh, well, it's a metaphoric, figurative death. And people think to themselves, just like I did, when I do ayahuasca, I'll be able to understand this, that it's metaphoric, and I'll just be like, oh, this is the part where I die, and let me just get through this. No, every single time I've done psychedelics deep enough where you have the death experience, you literally think you're going to die, and it is the most terrifying thing you can possibly imagine. And then you get ripped into hell, but all this stuff is the scary stuff, right? The other part of this is the beauty, which is so much more impactful than anything you can imagine on the scary side. Like the scary side is cosmically, Lovecraftian horror and just terrifying stuff. But the beauty is, this is going to sound crazy, it's just as terrifying. Imagine something so beautiful that it can kill you. It's something so powerful that even looking at it in the face is, just think of like Raiders of the Lost Ark or whatever it is. When they open the Ark of the Covenant, the guy's face melts off. Imagine seeing something so beautiful and so much love that it is painful and terrifying. Like, again, there's this Lovecraftian, not quite Lovecraftian because that's scary stuff. Imagine seeing something so cosmically huge and beautiful that it becomes terrifying the more you look at it. And now
that happens with people. I mean,
yeah.
That's why I think people hold back on love.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because it's so scary to love someone unconditionally or to give into true love.
Yeah, absolutely.
That they don't want to experience, even though they say they want to be in love, everyone wants love.
Yep. Yeah.
They hold back for whatever reason.
It hurts.
It hurts. It's to me, it's like one of my favorite songs from Nazareth. Love hurts.
Yeah. No. That is. I'm glad you said that because that is a way of bringing the divine back down. So I'm going to use that on my next episode, on the episode that I'm working on right now. I'll credit you, of course, but that is a perfect bridge. What you just said, because it seriously is the case. On these psychedelic experiences, I'll see something that is so beautiful and I'll experience so much love that it becomes life-threatening. And not only that, not only metaphorically or trippy-wise does it become life-threatening, but physically also. You'll be crying so much and so hard that you start to choke on your mucus. And imagine having a panic attack, a mucus-induced, choking on your mucus-induced panic attack, tripping on the second most powerful psychedelic known to man. So when I tell people, only do this if you need to do it, I literally mean that. It is as intense as you can possibly imagine. It's like, you want healing. This is the equivalent of getting on a landing craft on D-Day and slamming the beaches of Normandy to go heal yourself. It's like you're going to war and not only war. This is another thing I tell someone, like the psychedelic death experience. If someone were to run in, and I'm really sorry for anyone listening, take this as a warning, honestly, of it's not a joke. It's like you get into this stuff.
Or it's not just a trip.
It's not a recreational thing.
Right. You got to be serious, just like anything. I mean,
Yeah.
It's like anything, like when they talk about how it works, like the 12 steps.
Yes.
Half measures avail us nothing.
Yeah.
You've got to dive into the 12 steps, or you've got to dive into therapy, or
Yep.
you've got to really accept medication that you're on. Okay, is this going to help or not hurt? Are
Yeah.
you going to dive into and really do research
Oh,
on
yeah.
anything? Just don't just say, well, I'm going to do this just because.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, if I'm scaring anyone here, like if you think it's for you, don't let me scare you. I'm just letting you know how serious it is, because I'm telling you right now, the bad things can happen. Like 20% of people have bad trips. I'm one of those 20%. My bad trips, though, always rebounded into something beautiful, and there was a reason why I had to go through hell, and that reason is always something incredibly cry your eyeballs out beautiful. It'll be the most significant event in your entire life, bar none. But I'm telling you, it's going to be intense, and be ready for the change, because for me, it was quitting a 15-year career. I'm making a sixth of what I made, maybe even less than what I made. I'm struggling financially because of this decision. Other people will, they'll do ayahuasca and have an amazing trip, and it's like, all right, I'm getting a divorce. It's like that was an illusion of a marriage, and whether it was or not is immaterial. Either way, you're making an incredibly intense, life-changing decision. So
that could be. Do you feel that it could be very almost like too impulsive, or is it just that clarifying of an answer that I've got to change careers, or I got to get out of this relationship, because those are really major decisions.
For sure. I would say it's probably a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. I think that probably one of the reasons why maybe a lot of people make these kinds of decisions is because they're compulsive, right? Maybe that's the reason I chose ayahuasca in the first place. Maybe this one has tripped me out for a good while. Maybe I was, in a way, 75% cured before I even thought about, or before I even, once I made the decision to do ayahuasca, it's like maybe that was 75% there or 90% there. And all the rest of this is just some whiz bang kind of like fluffery to make me think that I didn't heal myself. Like it was an external thing that did it for me. And a lot of people say that that's all psychedelics does, is that it just, you're talking to your own subconscious. You're not talking to God. You're talking to you. I have a incredibly deep theory on that, which I won't get into now, lest we be here for another hour and a half. But I think it's both. I think that you are talking to yourself and God. And the reason I think that is because everything that we perceive is through our own brain. There's nothing that you have ever perceived in your entire life or will perceive in your entire life that isn't through your brain. If God were to interact with me, he has to interact through my brain. In fact, he told me as much in one of my experiences. I was trying to get him to clue me in on something that he told me about this riddle of existence thing, which I'm not going to get into, but I tried to coax something out of him, and he basically told me, I can't tell you something that you don't already know. And I was like, yes, you can. And he's like, no, I can't. Think about it. He's like, I am using your own brain right now to communicate to you. So how can I tell you something that you don't already know? And the implications there are staggering, because when you mind meld with God, he'll tell you stuff, but it's the subtext behind that, the context clues in this mind meld of, you get so much more than just the words that they say. There's this whole narrative and rich tapestry of what's behind it. And what came after that, when he told me that, was basically, so he says, I can't tell you something that you don't already know. I'm using your own brain to communicate with you. And the subtext was, we already know all this stuff. Like, anyone who's says they're like so incredibly enlightened, like people always talk about, hey, Ram Dass this and Terrence McKenna that. I'm like, we all have that knowledge in us, right? Whether they're right, wrong, or whatever. It's like the knowledge of existence and beyond is in us. We've just forgotten it, and psychedelics and stuff like that and spiritual endeavors will help you remember that which you've forgotten. And so, in so many words, I can't believe we're still on the first question. Psychedelics slams you incredibly hard on the path, but that's not the path. Being slammed down, being shown the path, and being slammed down on it is not the path. Staying on and navigating the path is the path. So, as much as I would love to say that psychedelics cured me, it didn't. As much as I would love to say God cured me, because God did so more than psychedelics. Psychedelics was just the vehicle to get me to God. God didn't even cure me. God slammed me down on the path, and it's my choice to stay on the path. Have I done better with psychedelics and God than I have on any other thing? Astronomically, a billion, quadrillion times over, yes. I am so much better across the board. I'll put it to you this way. I can hand anyone my cell phone right now, and with 100% confidence. Any sex addict out there, imagine that. Imagine giving someone your laptop and your cell phone and just saying, here you go. Like, send an email. Go on Google, look something up.
That can be terrifying.
Oh, exactly. And so there's a lot of things in my life that are so exponentially better than they were. I'm still wouldn't say that I'm fully recovered. Am I working on it? But here's the thing. I have this burning passion now to resolve that. And I'm trying everything I can. You know what the latest one is for me right now? Well, first of all, it's community. I'm still hesitant to go to churches and stuff like that. I, for one, think that you can find more God in the person dying of a fentanyl overdose in a gutter. I think you can find more God there than a building full of people that are mostly like-minded, patting each other on the back. By the way, I talked to a Christian. I said those exact words to a Christian person that I know, and that Christian told me that the person dying in the gutter of a fentanyl overdose is my enemy, and he's God's enemy. That came out of the mouth of a Christian, and this is why, y'all, I am hesitant to go to church. Jesus Christ himself said, you love your enemy, love your neighbor. A Christian said that about another human being that is worthy of redemption and love and forgiveness just like anyone else. In fact,
Well, actually, Jesus did that on the cross.
Exactly.
There was someone who asked for redemption at the last point.
Yes, absolutely. And so I don't want to rail on that guy too much. All I can tell you, sir, is to repent. But I love you like a brother, and you're my neighbor, and I'm not your enemy, and neither is the guy in the gutter, and that's my point. But I get in these tailspins, and I just keep talking.
Well, that's fine. So this'll actually, what you just said is going to actually lead into question 2. But I'm going to state 2 things. One, like you said, you want to do some research. And if you go back to earlier episodes on the 1% in Recovery podcast, should be episode 96. There was a guy called Matt Zion. He wrote a book, Psychedelics for Everyone. It's going to be in the show notes, just like Andrew's podcast. You're going to find links to everything that's stated in the podcast episode, so you don't have to do your own search. All you have to do is find it in the show notes. But he wrote this book. I have yet to read it, but I do think it is invaluable to get much more knowledge and informed before you do something, at least get some more ideas.
Absolutely.
And the other thing that you were talking about the boil and the scars.
Yes.
And this is the thing that I think is very important, which is leading into, you'll see how this connects to question 2. The most beautiful thing about everybody is their scar.
Yeah.
Is their story.
Yep.
Yet, so many of us run from our scars and from our stories.
Yep.
And that means is that we're truly not honest. Because I always say recovery begins with honesty.
Yeah.
You have to understand honesty before you even do the steps, before you even truly try to do self-awareness. If you're not willing to do that, look in the mirror, be honest. And it reminds me of a famous line from the movie Good Will Hunting, when Robin Williams is talking to Matt Damon, and he was explaining things about his wife, and things that, and he was saying, it's the imperfections that made me just love her more.
Absolutely.
And we truly, in any relationship, especially a loving relationship, spouse, partner, it's those little things, the scars, the weird little kind of ticks, or the way someone maybe cooks or moves or in bed, outside of the way they drive, whatever it is, that truly is what you embrace and love and draws you into that deep intimacy.
Yep.
But it goes in here to question 2. So let's address this.
Okay.
You had stated that at a point in your adult life that you were agnostic, you really didn't weren't atheist.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
a lot of people say even both. I'm agnostic and atheist.
Well, I did vacillate a little bit, but I was mostly atheist.
Okay, you were mostly atheist
and nihilist too, which is even far worse. But yeah.
And yet, by doing these psychedelic trips, especially when you were talking about ayahuasca, how it helped you understand that I am now a child of God. I believe in God.
Yep.
That's what I want you to touch on now is how ayahuasca, it could be about 2 parts, how ayahuasca can maybe help someone that is constantly stating that they're either agnostic or an atheist.
Yep.
And how that can maybe help them understand spirituality.
Yep.
Because recovery to me always has a piece in spirituality. Now, but everyone says you got to define your own spirituality, which I believe too. You don't want, no one wants to be pushed into, you have to believe this.
Yeah, yeah.
But also to kind of say is how ayahuasca helps you maybe understand these words like spirituality, or almost, and to me, being open-minded, which is a key word in recovery. How? And so talk about that.
So absolutely. So I in terms of my previous atheism/nihilism, atheism is one thing, but nihilism is an absolutely terrifying death spiral of, I'll put it to you this way. Imagine a person standing on a big pile of dirt. I didn't think that there was anything more special about the person over the pile of dirt. They're both just an assemblage of atoms. There's nothing more special about that assemblage of atoms compared to that assemblage of atoms. And it's once you start thinking like that there's nothing special about people. It gets even worse though, because a pile of dirt isn't capable of inflicting, purposefully inflicting suffering on another sentient being, right? So a pile of dirt is therefore more noble and respectful or respectable than a person. And so I really didn't. don't get me wrong, I loved people and everyone loved me. I wasn't like this hermit that, I wasn't like Ted Kaczynski or some kind of crap. People liked me and I liked people, but overall, just the concept of people in general, I thought we were a plague. I thought we were a virus. I thought I thought all problems on the planet could be linked, or just about all problems on the planet could be linked to overpopulation. I was harboring these thoughts of like, and this is really creepy because this is kind of in the same line of what the Nazis thought. And I caught myself one day after one of my experiences relived, like I was thinking about, I used to think like this, right? And I started going down this logic path of how I used to think. And I realized it's exactly how the Nazis think and thought. And this was the thought pattern. It went like this, something like this. I'm just playing out a scenario in my head of back in the day. It's like I'm stuck in traffic and there's a bunch of cars and no one likes being stuck in traffic. But I'm looking at all these people and I'm like, gosh, there's just too many people in this world. There's way too many people. There's so many problems on the planet that would be resolved if there were half the people on the planet. A lot of issues solved, right? And I would say stuff like, I don't want people to die, but, da da da. I'm going to just say that again, slower, so that everyone can hear it. I don't want people to die, but the world would be much better off if half the people were in it. The Nazis had the same kind of mentality towards Jewish people. It's like, hey, we want to kill these people humanely, right? They had all these elaborate schemes that they would do to funnel people unknowingly into their demise. They didn't want them to suffer and all this stuff, right? Which is so good for them, the same mentality. It's like, I don't want 11 million Jewish people to die, but we have to resolve this problem. We got, and so very dangerous, scary stuff. I can't believe I've gotten back into dangerous, scary stuff here, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is nihilism will drag you to those depths of I was worse than the Nazis. We're talking half of the people on the planet, me unknowingly calling for their deaths. That's half the people. That's half of my friends. That's half of my family. That could be me, dead, terrifying stuff. And that's 4 billion people. And the Nazis didn't kill all 85 million people who died in the human struggle of World War II, but 85 million is nowhere close to 4 billion. What is it, 47 times more? You'd have to fight World War II 47 times consecutively to get to the numbers that I'm talking about. Terrifying. I had no idea that I was harboring such evil. And so nihilism, y'all, is not something to be freaking taken lightly. Not even close. So yes, I reached this point. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. I reached this point where I was terrified of what I was becoming. I started seeing my addictions start to get to a place where the next step, the next escalation, addicts out there, I'm sure you are very familiar with the concept of escalations. Like, what's the next sexiest high that I can get? And it started to get to the point where it was like the next move that I make is going to be starting down a path that is really not cool. And I was like, what's going on here? I had to take an assessment of my whole life, and I was so depressed and cynical and hated. Again, I loved my direct people in arm's length, but overall people in general hated people. And I would look at my friends who were believers and stuff, and they're generally happy and can take things in stride, where little things happen to me and I'm crushed. And I'm like, I had this crisis of belief where I was like, I don't believe in God, and I still think people are a problem, but I want to be better and I want to be able to take things in stride. I need something to believe in. It was my thought. And I hated God. I was like, nope, don't want anything to do with him. He's a fairy tale. Jesus is a joke, all that stuff. And I'd heard people talk about, I'd done my research on psychedelics when I started to investigate that, and I saw a lot of people talk about they found God, and I was like, in my head, I'm like, okay, well, if I see God, I can write him off because I know it's not real, right? And I'll just write that off as a hallucination and just see what he has to say. I can glean like some stuff from him and just be like, okay, get out of here. No, no, it's like when you see him and he starts calling things out, specifically synchronistic stuff and predicting stuff that would happen later, in the sober waking light of day that was witnessed by other people. You can't deny the reality of that. And it was like, I forgot your question, sir, and I'm sorry, but
about how you during these trips, how you almost went from an atheist to a believer.
Yes.
So how psychedelics, or how in this case ayahuasca, helped you understand that your previous belief of atheism was incorrect for you.
Yes. Okay.
And that you actually now believe in God, love God.
Yeah, and so I would say to boil it down, and I'm never good at boiling things down, so I like to talk. Because you can look at it, and I've had yelling debates back when I was not as developed in my rhetoric around this kind of stuff. I had yelling debates with my friends about the reality of this, right? So like I had like 3 friends that I almost disowned for like several, almost a whole year. I like didn't talk to them because it was so raw. We were yelling at each other, and I was so newfound believers. They want to scream from the rooftops about God, right? And I was kind of doing that in a way, and I was basically telling them like, no, dude, no, y'all. I was legitimately talking to God, and they were of the mindset that I wasn't. It's like their argument went as follows. It's like, you took a psychedelic drug, you took a mind-altering substance. What did you expect? It's like, of course you're going to see something and of course you're going to be convinced that it was God. It's like that's how this works, but it's not God. It's a hallucination, clearly, right? And then the other argument was, it's like you're talking to your subconscious. And so, yeah, you can make that argument. And I knew that in the moment when I would see God. In fact, God said something to me one time that was so appalling that I was like, okay, this is obviously not real. Like what God told me is that life is a joke. And I got pissed off. Like, it's like, what? It's like this incredibly amazing, angelic looking ethereal being, the center of which represents a geometry that isn't even possible on this planet. I can't even tell you what the center of it looked like. I just know that it was made out of symmetry and love. And having a cosmic being like that tell you that life is a joke, I was like, okay. I was like, all right, this ayahuasca stuff is crap. I'm like, I called bullshit. I basically yelled at it. I was like, nope. I was like, I don't buy that at all. Sorry. No, you're wrong. And God was like, let me make my point. I was like, okay, make your point. And I'm ready to I'm coiled. I'm ready to pounce on him because I like anything that this thing says, I know is BS. There's nothing that's going to come out of its mouth that's going to convince me that life is a joke. Took him 20 seconds. And I was in tears and on the ground sobbing, saying, of course it is. Of course it is. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever bore witness to in my entire life. Best moment, can't be topped moment of my entire life. And I would get into that here, but it's going to take too long about the explanation. But all I can tell you is that what you think of as a joke, what you think what a joke is like, oh, it's a silly little thing, ha ha ha, forget it. The poetry of what he meant was poetry itself. He said, I'm going to do the Cliff's Notes version of it. It's like everything you think of the structure of a joke, there's a setup, which is the exposition. That's the details of the joke. And then you have a punchline. You can't have one without the other. You got to have both. You have the setup, the exposition, the details, and then you have the punchline, which gives the setup and exposition meaning and purpose and ties it up in a nice, pretty bow. That's what life is what he says. Every single thing in existence, everything is that. Everything is a setup to a punchline, or a punchline to a setup, and everything's interconnected therein. Everything, you are a punchline to my setup, this kind of stuff, and I am a setup to someone else's punchline, and sometimes our jokes kind of careen off of each other and even collide directly, and they feed off of each other, and this kind of thing. And so this whole existence, this whole universe is intertwined into this beautiful superset of intertwined jokes. Beautiful jokes. Again, when I say jokes, don't think ha-ha, think poetry, think beauty. Now, don't get me wrong, there are tragic jokes in there too. Let's never forget, Sophocles and Shakespeare wrote beautiful tragedies. They're still tragedies. So God seemed to have created a system of jokes, and finding his joke, right, in the never-ending cycle of joke. You can either try to make your own joke work, make your own joke happen, and you'll steer your cosmic car into a cosmic ditch, and there'll be a beautiful tragic joke. Or you can find God's joke, and you can live the beautiful glory that is that.
Well, that's what I said in the beginning. You've got to laugh every day.
Yeah.
So life is filled with jokes.
Yep.
Life is filled with tragedies.
Yeah.
And we've all experienced both. And to me, part of that means is that don't take life so seriously. Try to enjoy the moment of each day.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's kind of what has always been explained in so many different levels, whether we're talking about recovery, whether we're talking about emotions, we're talking about spirituality. You got these 24 hours. So many things can change, just like, hey, we're just here in Houston, and we're less than a week away from this unexplained tornado, high winds that disrupted, that nobody knew was coming.
Yeah.
And it just, a thunderstorm. And it's amazing how much, like you can say, is that that can happen. So to me, it makes perfect sense to talk about saying that life is a joke and what the meaning is.
Yeah.
But it kind of, you can finish this up also, because this I think will tie into also question 3.
Okay.
How would you help someone try to understand? They're on a quest, like this quest of recovery, and recovery just almost is like an ayahuasca trip.
Oh yeah.
Can go so many different directions.
Yep.
And we're not even just talking about, okay, I started recovery, I relapsed, I'm now just back into the addiction, but I'm also now into the beauty of recovery, learning about self-love, learning about forgiveness, learning just about emotional intelligence, spirituality, higher powers. Just try to help someone because you've had a different experience. Mm-hmm. Just kind of like how either they can start recovery, or kind of like either what kind of like recovery means to you that can maybe help someone maybe look at it a little differently, and not so, oh, I have to go to a treatment center, or I have to go to 12 steps, and that may just help them find themselves. Because I think what you're explaining, that to me, is that psychedelics, to some point, like you're saying, you're not going to, like, there is nothing out there that fully will make us fully recovered or give us total, true freedom from our addictions, but they all play a piece of it. And I think that's what you're trying to say, like, on these trips. So just, expound a little on what recovery means, or how you can look at recovery a little differently to get someone to a better place? Because that's what I'm assuming both of us want, is to get people to a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, it's all about suffering. It's all about, and what I mean by that, it's like suffering is inevitable, and the extremes of it have to, suffering is inevitable, and the extremes are inevitable.
You're almost sounding like the Catholic religion that I grew up in.
Yeah, I know.
You have to learn how to suffer.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of true. I think a Buddhist monk would agree, right? So to me, it's me and my wife recently went through a very extreme bout of suffering, and for me, it was very extreme because it was on the heels of a synchronicity that was just as earth-shattering as a psychedelic experience. And to kind of dovetail this back from the previous question, my ultimate proof that God was real, because regardless of the amazing things God tells me on psychedelics, like life is a joke, and regardless how amazing he presents that argument, you're still on psychedelics. That's not proof that God is real. You've taken a mind-altering substance. What I consider as proof is days, weeks, months later. It varies, but it always happens. It always happens where there is a sober waking light of day synchronicity. I used to call them cosmic coincidences before I knew what synchronicity really means. And for those of you who don't know what a synchronicity is, it is two events that happen simultaneously that aren't causally linked. So, like, I don't know, someone, an example for me before I found psychedelics was I was listening to NPR in my car, and they were talking about Obamacare. And one of the talking heads on the show said something like, well, they were throwing out a hypothetical, like if you got injured in a world of affordable care. And he goes, let's say that you were to go out and walk out into the road right now and get hit by a bus. Right when that guy said that, at the exact moment that he said that, a metro bus cut me off and I had to slam on my brakes. And so you have two events. There's no way that I daisy chain cause and effect events linked those two. The only thing that linked those events was my perception and the reality of what I was experiencing. That's what a synchronicity is. And I have had, after every single experience, psychedelics, whether it's ayahuasca or mushrooms, I have had these absolutely amazing, earth-shattering synchronicities that harken back to the central themes of the trip that has happened. And again, open to interpretation. It's just like a psychedelic trip because I'm the one witnessing. It's in my head, right? So someone could still come along and say, well, that's still not God, right? But when it's co-witnessed by other sober people that have never taken drugs before, because other people could say, oh, well, you've had the equivalent of an acid flashback, but with ayahuasca. No, other people that had never done psychedelics before in their life, not every one of these events, it's actually quite rare that it happens, but there's a handful of synchronicities that sober people have seen that I then explain, dude, you're never going to believe this. This was a central theme. Did you see what just happened? And they're like, yeah, that's crazy. I'm like, yeah, I know it's crazy. That was a central theme of my experience. And so you get these winks from God that to me are undeniable. Again, it's all explained. It can all be explained away rationally, but that's the point. That's the whole point of faith. Faith is not knowledge. God could come charging down right now in a flaming chariot, throwing lightning bolts, and prove to everyone that he's real. But that completely obliterates the beauty of faith, right? So you'll never get proof. But to me, that's the closest to proof I will ever get, and I think that we will ever get. But to bridge this now into that question of how do you suffering, right? I was mentioning suffering, a synchronicity. Okay, this is how I got here. I'm sorry, I'm getting these tailspins. one of my earth-shatteringly amazing synchronicities, which was always served up as proof of God for me, actually proved to be false, or either that or I misread the sign, right? I'm now convinced that I misread the sign, but I was given a sign, a synchronistic sign that something amazing was going to happen, and the opposite of that happened. And it, without getting into too much detail, it involved my wife also, a common goal that we both had, and just unbelievably beautiful signs that it was going to happen, and then it didn't. And it was absolutely brutally crushing to see my wife go through what she went through. But then on top of me, I had this crisis of faith. I was like, I was talking to God basically, and he almost kind of in a way through synchronicity promised me that this was going to happen, and it didn't. And it was the amount of suffering that I went through in that month. I mean, you talk about falling off the wagon, man. Like there was 2 days straight where I locked myself in that room. You can just imagine what happened. Threw all my religious stuff in the bathtub in here. I didn't throw them in the trash, but that was the next step. Renounced God. And then lo and behold, that very day, God proved himself to be real again. I'm like, okay, he's real again, but now I'm still angry with him. Regardless here, I'm suffering.
And that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. But regardless, the point here is suffering. I realized something about suffering through the course of this that was, I'll probably cry, so just get ready. My wife is friends with, well, I can't give it away because I don't want to bring them into psychedelics here, but my wife is friends with someone who is famous within the state of Texas. And she's, a woman in her 20s. And I never would have thought, I mean, it's not like it's not like women in their 20s aren't smart or anything. I'm just saying, like, this amount of wisdom coming from a 20-year-old freaking made me almost pull the car off on the side of the road. My wife was listening to her give a speech on her Instagram reel or something like that. And the MC of the thing that they were doing asked her, he said, tell me something about blessings in your life. Like, I forget exactly the question. Something about that. It's like, and her answer was, she considers her suffering to be a blessing. And this woman had just lost her mother to ALS. And I'm talking, it was such a quick, like her mother was a gorgeous woman just a year and a half ago and sitting, very active. And she went from that to quadriplegic and then gone. Tragic stuff. This woman has every right to let herself, get into addiction and all the stuff that but instead she looks this MC in the face and she says, my suffering are my blessings. She said, something to the effect of, the amount of suffering that I endure, I can learn from this and help others who are going through something similar. And I almost pulled the car. Me and my wife were driving back from New Orleans, and I was like, can you play that again, please? I've been trying to find the clip. It was on her news feed or whatever, and I can't find it. But I made my wife play it again. And I'm just sitting there, just mouth agape. Like, that's one of the most heartbreakingly beautiful things I've ever heard in my life. And that's what I think people need to do with addiction. We got to realize that suffering you can't reason with it. It's not as if suffering is a person that you can talk to and I can reason with you and say, hey, suffering, I know you're going to come at me no matter what, because suffering is inevitable, but could you just please not go after the things that I hold the most dear? Like, could you just go after the stuff I'm easy dealing with? And it's like, no, you can't reason with suffering. The whole reason that suffering is even here is so that we can rise above it. And what is the point unless you're rising above the most extreme? There's no point. You have to. That's why the extremes exist. It's a continuum, and sometimes we're suffering a little bit, and sometimes we're suffering a lot. You can't avoid the extremes. And so you got to live with them. You got to alchemize them, just like that amazing young woman. Take your suffering, absorb your scar, and learn from your scar. Do not inflict your scar on someone else. That's the worst thing. The perpetuation of scars is where all evil comes from. And so alchemize it. And to me, that's what makes the addict's journey beautiful. Absolutely right. It's like you cannot know light. I mean, this is the old tired thing, right? You can't know light without darkness.
Right. That's what I say in that famous poem of Dan Williamson on my very first YouTube video that I share. And in those lines, she says, our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are all powerful. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us.
Yep.
And then the other thing is that you were touching upon is what is sad is when someone refuses to get any type of help because they're so fearful of the stigma of saying, I have a gambling addiction, I have a sex addiction, I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And almost now some people are afraid to say, I'd rather say alcohol-free than alcoholic. I go,
yeah, come on.
The true essence is you've gone over the line.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, to me, I always say is I'm a grateful compulsive gambler. I'm a grateful alcoholic because it allowed me to find myself. If I didn't have to go through all that suffering, I never would have been able to then have this podcast, to have these videos, to create a system, the Recovery Freedom Circle, that is going to help so many people that are trying to find a way to understand.
Yeah.
I've been in this game, in this arena for 25 years. And I think finally 4 years ago, it's almost as like what you're saying. God, I like to say my belief is God, or I say higher power, or I say what the American Indians said, the great mystery.
Yeah.
That he gave me this gift, the gift of voice, the gift of pen, and the ability to explain recovery so more and more people can truly live their best life.
Absolutely. Well, what a beautiful, that is alchemization of suffering right there. It's a beautiful thing. And it's hard.
That's the thing. It doesn't mean you're not going to cry.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you're not going to get mad, depressed, anxious, all these feelings that we tend to run away with.
Yep.
And what do some of the addicts say? Well, I did my addiction because I wanted to escape life.
Yeah.
And in reality, what you're saying is I did my addiction because I wanted to escape my feelings because I didn't know how to deal with it. And unfortunately, most of us, I'd say almost 90, higher than 90%, we grew up in families that didn't understand those two words, emotional intelligence, and how vital it is for life.
Yeah. You want to hear what God told me about addiction?
Please.
This is one of the most heartbreakingly beautiful things I've ever heard in my entire life. I was looking God straight in the face, and the lighthearted subject matter of, hey, God, can you tell me how free will and predeterminism reconciles and squares up in your creation? Because I know both of them to be true. And God looked at me in the face and said, I am free will. Again, when I talked about the mind melding, like God can tell you 4 words. Again, I am free will. 4 words. The mind meld and the stuff that spilled out after that was just absolutely cosmically amazing. And then, of course, so he's basically saying our will is his will. And then, of course, the next question, the logical question is like, well, then why do bad things happen? Why does evil happen? I'm not going to get into that, but there is anyone who wants to listen to why that happens. I have an episode coming out called, I haven't named it yet, but I'm probably going to call it something in regards of what it is. It's like, why does God allow evil to exist? The answer he gave me was just jaw-droppingly epic. Wow. But nestled in the meaning of that, the subtext was this message that he conveyed to me, which was our natural homing mechanism if we were born into a vacuum and weren't subject to death or injury by, survival kind of stuff, right? And I already know that this hypothetical is impossible, but just imagine being born into a vacuum where you're impervious, you can't die. Survival isn't a thing. Our natural homing mechanism in that landscape is up to God. Like we share purely in his free will in that kind of setting. But the second you draw breath in this world, you have to engage in survival. You have to engage in kind of some cutthroat Machiavellian kind of like tactics, which is not the will of God, right? So God kind of showed me or told me in a way that all the good things that you see in life are him. When you make a good decision, that's him. That's his will. At the core of you is that thing born into a vacuum that is impervious to death. That is the will of God, right? It's like that core of you. You can call it a soul. I think it makes perfect sense to call it that. That core, just like imagine an onion, and the core of that onion is innocence and seeking the love of God. And this is where it gets heartbreaking. Beautiful, but heartbreaking. The further out of that onion you get, the more exposed to survival, the more exposed to the harsh reality of existence it gets, the more rotten the layers become. And that signal of the love for God gets corrupted and confused in the outer layers, and it gets twisted into something that it's not. And that's what addiction is. Heartbreakingly beautiful stuff. It's almost like the deeper the addiction, the more desperate you are, the deeper your actual longing for the love of God is. It's just that we've confused that love with hedonistic pleasure. And it's not even pleasure, especially sex addiction kind of stuff, is not even pleasure. It's a release of pain is what it is. To me, I liken it to having mosquito bites. I love scratching mosquito bites. I love it. But I wouldn't go out into the woods and get bitten by 1,000 mosquitoes. That's stupid. So I had this thought one day, it's like, why does it feel good? And I asked this really smart friend of mine who always cuts through the mustard on this kind of stuff. I didn't tell him the subtext or the context. I was like, hey man, didn't you notice that mosquito bites feel good when you itch them? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, why? It's like they're mosquito bites. And he kind of thought for a second. He's like, it's not that you're getting pleasure out of it. It's it's the release of pain. And I was like, holy crap, that's addiction. Addiction is getting mosquito bites and continuing to, we have been tricked into thinking that mosquito bites are pleasurable, and we're going out and we're getting them and we're scratching ourselves to death, and it's horrific. And the center of you is while the center of you is calling for the love of God, and it's this giant trick that's been played on us. And it's so when that Christian guy I mentioned earlier, who was saying the guy dying in the gutter of a fentanyl addiction is our enemy. I don't know. Were we recording when I said that? Again, sir, I'm sorry to say this, but repent, sir. But the guy who said that needs to take that into account. That person down there, the real him or her, is screaming that loudly, like the intensity of his or her death in this gutter perfectly reflects the intensity of their longingness and calling for the love of God. And I think that is one of the most beautiful yet heartbreaking things that I've ever encountered on psychedelics. It's one of those, like, where do you put that? It's like, is that good or bad? It's unimaginably good, but it's like this world does this to people, and these people wouldn't be there if they weren't an accumulation of their scars and their ancestors' scars. People need to have a lot more compassion for your fellow man or woman.
Well, but here's the thing: like, if we're going to just talk about the steps, And they talk about like step 6 when it really focuses on character defects. What I always like to say is, and you hear some people say, well, I got to work on my character defects for the rest of my life. And this can apply to anybody that's in the world. They have some type of character defects, whether they're being selfish, whether they have envy, jealousy, any of those things that we try to not get into.
Yeah.
I always say a character defect is really trying to show us our own self-destructive behavior. And in reality, we can take our self-destructive behavior all the way to the line of suicide.
Oh, yeah.
Or OD.
Yep.
So the guy who died with fentanyl was no different than me or so many other people in addictions that is self-destructing.
Yep.
Because any day when you're in your addiction, it could be your last, depending on what your addiction is.
Oh, yeah.
Because your mind can get overwhelmed, and then you can stop being self-destructive, and then you can start to get suicidal ideation. You can start to actually plan out some type of suicide or actually try to do suicide.
Oh, yeah.
And so I always say is that to kind of get out of this is that it is spoken in all types of 12-step literature. It kind of pushed in all types of psychology. What we're really trying to do is not only become self-aware, is how to build up each and every one of our character. What is your character strengths? And then that truly, to me, is God speaking to each individual. If you try to embrace and strengthen and improve your character strengths, you become a better version of yourself, which means is that you are now living, not surviving. But anything that I think can get you there is very important. So any any final words, whether we're going to be talking about addiction recovery, psychedelics, so then as we wrap up this episode?
Final words for me, by the way, unbelievable discussion. Sorry if I talked too long. I'm looking at we are an hour and 13 minutes in, son. So sorry if I talk a lot. But to close things out, I just want to reiterate to people, you might be turned off by the intensity of what I'm telling you. Y'all, I went in deep into psychedelics. I'm talking, I was like, y'all, I did 9 ounces of ayahuasca one time. That is crazy. And so when I'm kind of outside the norm here in terms of the intensity, ayahuasca in general is going to be intense. Don't get me wrong. But basically what I'm trying to say here, y'all, is don't let me scare you too much. If you really think that this is for you, and again, I would say if you're just curious, I wouldn't do it. I would do it if you're serious. If you are serious, don't let me scare you. It is going to be intense, but y'all, it's like being in a fist fight or something for anyone who's been in one. It's like it's maybe fist fight's not the right. It's kind of like that in a way, or a boxing match, something more pleasant where it's not. I mean, a boxing match is 2 willing combatants. So we'll say, let's say you got into a fight with Mike Tyson in a sanctioned boxing match and won. Would that not be thrilling? It would be brutal, but it'd be thrilling. So what I'm saying here is don't let me scare you. Yes, it'll be intense, but it will be the most amazing experience of your life, bar none. I kid you not. You may have to take a couple stabs at it to get it right because ayahuasca is a very finicky thing. Like it has to be ready for you, not the other way around. It's actually true. It's like it does what it does when it's ready, not when you're ready. But when it does happen, it's like, holy moly, like strap into the rocket ship. So do it if you must. And just, let...
It could be a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening that some people are trying to get to.
Yes.
It could help you understand a few things.
Absolutely. And I would say to close out is also, of course, because of those things that I mentioned, some of the terrifying stuff is if you do, because you can do the equivalent of an ayahuasca trip if you take enough like mushrooms or something like that, right? If you take a ton of mushrooms, you can have an ayahuasca-like experience. All I can tell y'all is have someone there with you who is not tripping, preferably someone who's bigger and stronger than you, because if a trip goes bad, it can go really bad and people have died. And not from the drugs, it's from you're freaking out so much that you kill someone or yourself. So that happens in extremely, 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 extremely rare instances, but be safe. And y'all, and here's the other thing. I want to let everyone know I did all my psychedelics here, ayahuasca and mushrooms. I did them all legally. So find a way to do them legally. It is possible. These are still class 1 schedule. I forget what it's called, but it's still just do them legally. There are ways. Go research them. Plenty of ways to do it legally. And by the way, you can do it legally without leaving the country.
There's clinics. Actually, like I said in an earlier episode, Matt does talk a lot about there are clinics. You just got to do some research. And one thing is I think what you're trying to say is if it's something you want to do, get informed, but also be safe.
Be safe. Absolutely. And then y'all watch the blessings unfurl. Trust me when I say when you open that door, it is going to be life-changing. You're going to get the suffering too, don't get me wrong, but you'll be able to alchemize that suffering, as we just mentioned, much better than you would otherwise. I'm not a pro at it by any means, but I'm way better. I wasn't even capable of alchemizing suffering before. But the miracles that have spilled out after that are countless and bountiful. That's the same. Those are synonyms. They're countless and cosmic. So be ready for awesomeness is all I can say.
All right. I appreciate it, Andrew. So as we have the final words is that psychedelics can be a positive experience in your recovery journey. With that, we will conclude this episode of the 1% in Recovery.
Awesome.
So real quick, I just wanted to point out a couple things that are pretty interesting here. So I have this word of the day screensaver on my computer, and it cycles through like 5 or 6. I don't remember exactly how many words, but there's a handful of words that it cycles through each day, and it's the same words for the day. The next day, it's a different group of 5 words, and it gives you the word and its definition, right? And they're almost always, incredibly synchronistically amazing. Shoot, y'all, there was this time I was recording an episode, and I was talking about the concept of yin and yang, and I don't remember if it was yin or yang. It was one of the two. That was the definition that popped up right when I was talking about that. Then there was this time where I was interviewing a friend of mine, and he mentions that he had an out-of-body experience where he, was a kid again all of a sudden, and his grandpa was giving him a raspberry, like the on your stomach. Right when he said that word, the word raspberry popped up on my screen. There's been all kinds of stuff like that. I mean, don't get me started about this whole Jesus thing and Maverick. The story behind that, if y'all haven't heard, my correlation to Jesus and the word Maverick or the name Maverick. And if you don't know that, I don't got time to tell you, y'all, but it's incredibly deeply profound. And I had an experience with Maverick and the word salvation and all this stuff. It's just absolutely mind-blowing. But today, y'all, I sat down to record this thing here. And even though this isn't absolutely germane to this specific episode, this word right here popped up, positivism, which is germane to my whole, Journey Through the Pantheos. Now, a philosophical system that holds that every rationally justifiable assertion can be scientifically verified or is capable of logical or mathematical proof, and that therefore rejects metaphysics and theism. I didn't know that word existed. I mean, I think I've heard it once or twice before, but I didn't know that was my thing. I haven't seen the definition and the word and the definition together to put two and two together, but that is exactly what I used to be, and I continue to fight. My tendencies are that. Being a scientifically minded person, that's what I've been fighting this whole time. Then this word popped up, theodicy. The vindication of divine goodness and providence in the view of the existence of evil. The vindication of divine goodness and providence in view of the existence of evil. I'm working on an episode right now that tackles specifically the existence of evil and why evil exists. This whole beef that people have with God about, like, if God is real, and if he's good and all powerful, why does he allow evil to exist? Why does he allow bad things to happen to good people? I hate to sound so egotistical here, y'all, but in my opinion, I have about the best answer. God, this is going to sound really egotistical. I feel like I have probably the best answer that we can hope to get in this existence, as paradoxical as this answer is going to be and is, in a world of paradoxes, and we can't escape these paradoxes. This is the best paradoxical answer that we're going to be able to get. I am specifically answering that question, and in my opinion, this is the best episode that I've ever done. I'm literally working on that episode right now. I'm 40 minutes in. It's probably going to be about an hour and a half episode, because there's a lot of really intensely deep philosophical stuff to cover. But I'm literally covering that exact question, that exact problem, that exact paradox. And then we got this word here, Empyrean, which is relating to heaven or the sky. So just crazy. This happens all the time. And no, I've researched this, and there's nothing in the algorithm that listens to what you're saying and just throws you words that are pertinent. It would be a waste of computing power and development to do that on such a silly little thing like a screensaver. So it would be stupid to do that. And then number two, I've researched it, and they don't do that. There's not listening to me and feeding me words that match with what I'm talking about. So just one of these amazing coincidental. You can call it coincidence. I call it synchronicity. I call it further a wink from God. But yeah, anyway, just wanted to point that out. Other thing I want to point out, y'all, is this interview is one of many that I've recorded already. So I have, like, no joke, like 5 or 6 pre-recorded interviews that I just didn't know what to do with yet. I didn't know how to release them or when to release them or what. But this is the first of many. I got interviews with my boy Sergio. I got interviews with my boy Ben. I got interviews with my boy Bill. I got interviews with I even got Ancient Gear. I got interviews with you. We'll talk about if and how we want to release those. Anyways, I got a lot of stuff coming up. We still got the Into the Astral series that I want to conclude. We got some really great stuff there. So yeah, this is going to be kind of a transformation. Still going to do trip reports, but I'm going to do them only when they're incredibly unique, right? And they may be shorter. I'm going to try to only focus on the important, unique stuff, but I'm still going to do them. So don't worry, those of you who love them. Anyways, I'll talk to you all later. I love you all, and be ready for the next episode. This is kind of a sidestep from the through line. I'm still going to do these unpacking episodes of the last trip report and stuff like that. So thank you so much. Talk to you all later. Bye.